In this episode of American Greed Biggest Cons, new developments in our most shocking cases of greed. Tonight, Martin Shkreli.
The Supreme Court has denied Martin Shkreli's request to hear an appeal of...
Shkreli, a.k.a. the Pharma Bro, is in federal prison for committing securities fraud.
Martin Shkreli spending time behind bars in solitary confinement.
Now the pharmaceutical industry's most hated villain is accused by the government of running a monopoly from behind bars.
The Wall Street Journal reported he had a contraband cell phone and he was using that to be the shadow CEO running this drug company.
If that's true, prison hasn't cured Shkreli of what some would call his worst impulses.
He wants Martin Shkreli to be a household name. And I'm not sure that he minds that it's infamy, that it's a notorious name.
Whether he's committing securities fraud or trolling people on the internet, Shkreli doesn't think he has to answer to anybody, especially us.
No questions from CNBC, I'm sorry.
Not even the Secret Service, after he makes an alarming Facebook post.
Oh, you done went too far now, you stupid prick.
Will Martin Shkreli ever learn his lesson? Or is he too hooked on his own hype?
New York City. 8 million stories. Mine's the best.
The Fort Dix Federal Correctional Institution in New Jersey isn't the likeliest place you'd go to build a fortune. But 35-year-old federal inmate Martin Shkreli has never lacked audacity. The former hedge fund manager and pharmaceutical CEO is serving a 7-year prison sentence for committing securities fraud after deceiving investors. One might think that his career is finished.
We know Martin Shkreli as the Pharma Bro, the guy who raised the price of a life-saving drug by 5,000% overnight and showed absolutely no remorse for doing so. That is not what put him in prison. However, even after he was arrested and charged with these crimes, he was still inextricably linked with his company.
By all appearances, Shkreli resigned from the company that he founded, Turing Pharmaceuticals, and a new CEO took over in December 2015. As its flashy new website conveys, the firm rebranded itself and changed its name to Viera Pharmaceuticals. But what Viera doesn't advertise is that Martin Shkreli still owns a big stake in the firm, about 40% of it.
They could have changed the name to whatever they wanted to. Martin Shkreli was the most significant shareholder behind the scenes, and he remains the most significant shareholder. The fact is that he was in control in this company, and there's been plenty of evidence that even since he's been in prison, that he's called the shots at that company.
According to a Federal Trade Commission complaint, Shkreli's in regular contact with his successor and steering Viera's business strategy from behind bars. Allegedly, he's been using a contraband smartphone to make calls and send emails on the sly. If that's true, he risks facing another year in prison for breaking federal prison law. But Shkreli, as Viera's biggest shareholder, has a vested interest in the firm's success. According to the Wall Street Journal, he's projecting that his company will be worth $3.7 billion by the time he gets out, as long as his associates continue to follow his master plan.
This company is Martin's baby. People that Martin surrounds himself with tend to be very loyal to him as a rule. Their professional and financial interests are closely tied to that company. And if they don't do what he says, they're likely to get the boot and not benefit from any of the payoff.
If the allegations are true, their prescription for getting rich could become their poison. Federal and state authorities will later claim that Shkreli is unlawfully blocking competitors from developing a generic version of his best-selling product, Daraprim, an anti-parasitic drug.
The allegation here is that what he and his cohorts at the company did was took actions to prevent competitors coming to the market with a generic competitor to Daraprim. In some cases, they took steps that would limit their competitors' access to chemicals that are needed to produce a generic version of the drug.
The important thing about that is when a drug has no competition, that's when you can raise the price as high as you want and nobody can do anything about it because there is no other option.
He's trying to game the system here to maintain what many people would call obscenely high profits for this drug.
When companies increase a price on a very important medication like Defraud, the consequences for Americans can be devastating. And it's actually not just on the people who have to use those medications, but it's to the system as a whole.
When prison officials learn that Shkreli's allegedly using a contraband cell phone, they throw him into solitary confinement. If there's one thing that he's perfected, it's how to push the envelope too far.
This is part and parcel of his psychological makeup. He's always seeking some kind of edge, and it's in a way that's distasteful to a lot of people.
Some people can see that long before Martin Shkreli becomes a household name. In the early 2000s, Caroline Stewart is a Wall Street stock analyst who publishes recommendations for biotech stocks. And one morning, after advising against a stock Shkreli is high on, she says he ambushes her with an unsolicited and insulting phone call.
There are times when you get nasty phone calls from people who hold the opposite viewpoint as you on any particular stock. But he's the only instance I could think of where it was actually meant to ridicule. And it quickly devolved into sort of a mockery of me, where he started to ask questions that were obviously meant to just make me feel stupid.
But years later, they meet again when Shkreli is running a hedge fund of his own. And this time, things are much more cordial.
He offered to take me on as a consultant. And I was, again, extremely grateful, and I jumped at the chance.
The company is called MSMB Capital, a hedge fund that specializes in biotech and pharmaceutical investing. It's a red-hot industry on Wall Street, and one Stewart knows well. She works for the fund as an analyst, but beyond researching stocks, she doesn't know much about the inner workings of the company.
It was very strange because, as far as I could tell, there was no audited performance record. And I didn't know how much he had in essence, under management. He was very secretive. He was very, very secretive about things.
Well, ostensibly, MSMB Capital was supposed to be a hedge fund, a true hedge fund. It's supposed to have equal amounts of short and long positions, so it minimizes the risk to investors of a substantial loss. That's how he pitches to investors.
Shkreli tells investors that in the bustle of high-powered investment banks in the heart of the world's biggest financial market, he will work harder and smarter than everyone else.
He made connections with people. He would make a connection to one person, that person would introduce him to another person, and he cultivated these relationships among investors, people that ended up being willing to put capital into his new hedge fund.
People on Wall Street are there for a reason. It's because they want to make money, and money is very important to them. And so everybody's kind of attracted by it, and everybody wants to, jump on that coattail.
But one day, that coattail drags them into the mud.
He took a very aggressive short position on a stock called Orexigen, and that stock trade failed spectacularly. It blew up. And it lost all of MSMB's, or effectively all of MSMB Capital's money. So he was broke.
According to Stewart, Shkreli keeps the destruction of the fund to himself, even hiding it from employees. But for days afterwards, Stewart can see Shkreli's roaring fire extinguished.
He seemed very deflated, and the lights in the office were off. He was slumped in his chair, he had his hoodie up. And I felt bad for him, because this is a normally very hyper person, if you will, and very aggressive, ambitious, who suddenly, was more like a dog with his tail between its legs. And it was sometime a little later that he told me that the fund had blown up And then he told me that he owed Bank of America Merrill Lynch $10 million.